Attention viewers. The views expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Acts Ministry, Acts Media Group, and or their affiliate and subordinate ministries and or nonprofits. So without any further ado, here with the Basics of Faith, it's Dr. M. Take it away, Dr. M.
Yeah, I'm Marty, and this is Basics of Faith. Let's have a happy and blessed 2020 year. And I want to continue in our book of Joshua, but I got something on my mind that I'd like to share with you. And the Bible consists of an Old Testament and a New Testament, and it's relevant with the way God dealt with people. So what if God made a Bible about me and you? Okay? He'd probably started off with our birth, and, tell about how, different stories about how we were raised and all this, and go through life. But then there come a point where we have opportunity to have a New Testament. So you got the Old Testament, and then you got this New Testament. Well, the New Testament would be about our new birth, okay? And we could go through different scenarios of what that would be like. The blessings that God has for us, and, times that we need to trust God and be with God, and just basically our life after our changed life, the new birth. That's what it's all about. It's a changed life. It's different than before. And so in this year 2020, let's kind of concentrate on that and let God be more part of our life. How about that? Okay? So like I say, we want to talk about Joshua today. I'm going to start in Joshua 23. And he announced to the Israelites that he was up in age and that they had been given a rest from all of their enemies. They'd been warned this whole time ever since they hit the promised land. Joshua warned them not to have anything to do with the surrounding nations. Especially he didn't want them to intermarry or start worshiping in pagan gods. God did their fighting for them and for them not to break his covenant with the Israelites. This covenant business is important to God, and God makes covenants with the people back then, and it changed a little bit because usually the people didn't hold up to their end of the covenant. Joshua reviewed their history of all that God had done for them, and he died at 110 years old. God gave into the Israelite hands the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Joshua warned them of accepting foreign gods. He said, don't do it. They swore allegiance to God, and Joshua marked a stone as a witness to them. Like I said last time, that we have this recurring theme where the Israelites love to complain. They complained to Moses. They complained to God. Remember, they wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb because they wanted to take them over to the promised land. And they wanted to stone them for that. There's a guy by the name of Barak. And he wouldn't go to war unless there was this Deborah, which is a prophetess, and she was a judge. Barak wouldn't go to war unless she would go with him. And so Barak took 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and Zebulun, tribes. And so there's 10,000 of them to go after a guy by the name of Sisera. Deborah prophesied that Barak would not get the glory because Sisera would be killed by a woman because he made her go along, which was pretty cool. And so everyone was killed by Barak except this Sisera guy. He escaped to the tent of Jael, Jael, and she was the wife of Heber the Kenite. And Jael hid Sisera, but when he went to sleep, she drove a tent peg through his temple and killed Sisera. So she was a woman, and she got the glory for killing this guy, just as Deborah prophesied. Afterward, the Israelites got a lot stronger and destroyed Jabin. He was the king of the Canaanites. So we're in Judges now, and Israel did evil in the sight of God. This was a recurring theme back there with the Judges. The judges would get them on the right track, and then they'd start backsliding. So they did evil in the sight of God and was delivered to the Midianites and the Amalekites and also what they called the people from the east for 7 years. 7, if you remember, is a perfection number with God. The Israelites cried out to God because all of their food would be destroyed. And Gideon saw the angel of the Lord face to face. He was not sure that he was hearing the right thing from God, so he asked for a sign after he made an offering. So he called it fleecing, and you'll understand here in a minute maybe, but he wasn't sure what God wanted him to do, so he kind of tested God. Or not. I don't know if testing's good because you're not supposed to test God, but that's kind of what he did to make sure he was on the right track, okay? And so God gave him a sign, and Gideon tore down his father's altar to Baal. And that was the whole thing is, like I say, they go away from God, and then they start worshiping pagan gods, which is Baal. Gideon put a fleece of wool out on the threshing floor, and if there was dew on the fleece only the next morning, then Gideon knew that God would deliver the Israelites' enemies to them. But then he wasn't even sure if that fleece was right. So then he said, okay, God, well, what you do is another fleece was done. If the fleece would be dry and the floor would be wet. So it'd just be opposite. And that way he was more assured. And God did it. So this fleecing deal let Gideon go on. So Gideon's other name was Jerubbaal, Jeru, 2 B's, 2 A's, L. And God said there were too many in Gideon's army and dwindled them from 32,000 down to 10,000. That still wasn't good enough for God. So God said that there will be still too many, and took only 300 men that brought their, okay. So what he said was, whoever goes down and drinks out of a river, if they bend over and drink out of a river, then those won't be the men we'll take. We want the ones that pull the water up and put it in their face and kind of lap at it like a dog. Okay? And then he goes, those are the ones we're going to take to go to war with them. And so there's 300 of them. So Gideon divided the troop into 100 each, and they carried a torch in their left hand and a trumpet in their right hand. They cried out the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So here we go. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the sight of God and was delivered into the hands of the Philistines, this time for 40 years. So it went from 7 years to 40 years of captivity type. Samson was born as a Nazirite to Manoah and his wife. And we covered this before, I don't know if you remember or not, but a Nazirite doesn't take razors to their heads, they don't drink wine, and they don't eat anything unclean throughout their life, okay? Manoah's wife was barren until she saw the angel of the Lord and was blessed with Samson. Samson's a pretty neat story, I think, and I'm going to read a little bit out of the Bible here, but let me get you started. Samson killed a lion, and a honeybee hive was in it, okay? Let me pick up, let's go Judges 14:5. And I'll start with, so Samson went down to Timnah with his wife and mother and came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand, but he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. After some time, when he returned to get her, he turned aside to see the carcass of a lamb, and behold, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of a lion. He took some of it in his hands and went along eating. When he came to his father and mother, he gave some to them, and they also ate. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of a lion. So his father went down to the woman, and Samson gave a feast there, for a young man used to do so. And it happened when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. Then Samson said to him, "Let me pose a riddle to you. If you can correctly solve and explain it to me, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot explain it to me, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing." And they said to him, "Pose your riddle that we may hear it." So he said to them, okay, this is the riddle. He says, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." Now for 3 days they could not explain the riddle. So let me go through this. Samson killed a lion, and a honeybee hive was in it. Okay, that's where the honey was. During a 7-day feast, Samson posed a riddle to the 30 men that were there. If they answered within the allotted time, Samson would give them linen garments and change of clothing. If they lost, he would be receiving. The 30 men threatened his wife's family if they did not get the answer to the riddle from her. His wife prodded Samson until he told her the answer, and she related to the 30 men. Samson went to another town and killed 30 men and took their clothes to give to the men lost the wages to. So he lost the bet, and so he went and got it from 30 other men. Then he turned around and gave his wife to his best man. We're continuing in Judges. So this would be Judges 15. So Samson's father-in-law, Timnite, gave his wife to Samson's companion. Samson went and caught 300 foxes and tied torches that were on fire to the foxes. So he tied the tails of 2 of the foxes together and put a torch on it. The fires destroyed all the grain of the olive groves and vineyards of the Philistines. For revenge, the Philistines burned his father-in-law, killed his father-in-law, burned him, and also his wife. Samson dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Edom after slaughtering many of the Philistines. Men from Judah arrested Samson and took him to the Philistines. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson that he was confronted by the Philistines. He broke the new ropes. They tied him up with new ropes that had bound him and killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. God gave Samson drink, and he judged Israel for 20 years. So in the meantime, he lost his wife, so he took up with this gal named Delilah, whom the Philistines bribed to find out how Samson maintained his strength. After lying to her several times, he kept on telling her stories that wound up weren't true. And Samson finally told her that he was a Nazirite to God and that he could not shave his head. So what she do? She had his head shaven, and so he lost all his strength. So she called in the Philistines. The Philistines came in, and they blinded Samson and took him to Gaza. And I reckon this is the same Gaza that we hear about in the news today all the time. So in the meantime, Samson's hair grew back. So the Philistines had Samson perform for them while they sacrificed to their god. His name was Dagon. Okay? About 3,000 men with their women were in the temple, and Samson asked God to give him back his strength so that he could basically kill himself and the Philistines. So he was tied to the columns. I'm sure if you remember, it's an old movie, but if you remember, he's between 2 columns tied up, and he pulls them down with all his strength. He pulls down the columns, and that collapses the temple and kills everybody in it. And so during this whole time of Samson, he was a judge for Israel for 20 years. Okay, let's go to 1 Samuel. This beginning of 1 Samuel 1. A guy by the name of Elkanah was from the tribe of Ephraim, and he had two wives. One of the wives was named Peninnah, Peninnah, and he gave the other wife, Hannah, trouble because she didn't have any children, but Hannah did not. So it's a recurring theme where, kind of like Sarah and Hagar, you know, how they were rude to each other because they didn't have any kids and all this. So it's the same type of situation here. But anyway, she was giving Hannah a hard time, and so Eli, the chief priest, thought she was drunk, but actually she was. She explained to Eli that she was making a vow to God that she would take her son, become a Nazirite if the Lord would give her a son. So she was barren, and if he granted her a son, then she would let him be a Nazirite. Eli assured her that God would honor her request, and so God did, and she had a son. So whenever he was weaning age, Hannah took him to Shiloh to the priest and offered sacrifices and her son to God. So she gave him up as a Nazirite. And so later on, because Eli's sons were corrupt, they did a lot of bad things, and these were the priest of the temple. Okay, they're sons of Eli, and it says in verse 3:1 in 1 Samuel, there was no widespread revelation from God in those days, and word from the Lord was a rare thing. So the corruption in the priesthood caused God to quit talking to him. Okay, and so the Nazirite boy Samuel thought Eli was calling him instead of God. So he kept going back to Eli and said, are you calling me? And Eli says, no, I'm not calling you. And it's actually God calling him. And so finally, about 3 or 4 times this happens, and Eli told Samuel how to answer to God. And God told Samuel that Eli would be judged because of the iniquity of Eli's sons. And Samuel told Eli what was going on. So Samuel grew from Dan, which is up north, to Beersheba, that the Israelites knew that Samuel was made a prophet by God. Okay? And God appeared to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. So when Samuel was old, so we're going through his life, but when Samuel was old, the elders of Israel came to him and asked for a king to judge them like the other nations. All the surrounding pagan nations around Israel, they all had kings. And so Israel had the right idea to decide they wanted a king. They didn't want God to be their king anymore. They wanted a human king. So Samuel's sons, Joel and Abijah, were judges in Beersheba, and they took bribes for dishonest gains and perverted justice. So now even the judges are corrupt. Okay? You just have this recurring theme. God told Samuel that the Israelites did not reject Samuel, but they actually rejected God. And they had forsaken God and served other gods. God told Samuel to warn the people how a king would govern them, but they argued they still wanted a king like the other nations. God told Samuel to grant their request. Samuel sent the Israelites back to their cities. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was a tall and a real handsome guy. And his father Kish had lost all his donkeys and asked Saul to go find them. So they were in the land of Zuth, Z-E-Z-U-T-H. Saul took a quarter of a shekel of silver as a gift to the prophet Samuel. So to give you an idea what a quarter shekel of silver would be, it would be like a shekel was a day's wages back then. So say you worked for 8 hours. So, yeah. So if you worked like 8-hour day, it would be 2 hours pay. Does that make sense?
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, it was quite a bit of money. So Samuel told Saul his donkeys had been found, but that he wanted to talk with him the next day. Okay? So during this, Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it on Saul's head, and he anointed Saul as king of Israel. Samuel told him that he would see several signs from God during his travel. This is important, I think, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Saul and changed him into a new man. Okay? So it'd be kind of like a conversion here, kind of like we talked about the New Testament type thing earlier. Samuel sent Saul to Gilgal and told him to wait there for 7 days. Samuel told the people that Saul was their king, but some of the people rejected Saul. They despised him. So that went down. So Saul had a son. His name was Jonathan. He crossed over to the Philistines. Well, I got 5 minutes.
Just now, 5 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Where am I at?
Saul and Jonathan.
Okay, so Saul's son was named Jonathan, and he crossed over to the Philistines with his armor bearer. And Jonathan, him and the armor bearer made up his plan. Jonathan knew that the Lord was with him if Philistines invited him to camp. Whenever they came there, they said, "Come on up into my camp." He knew if they rejected him that he wasn't going to be able to take the Philistines on. So anyway, they invited him on into the camp, and he killed 20 Philistines, and him by himself killing these 20 Philistines scared the whole garrison. And so the Philistines started fighting, but they started fighting each other and killing each other. So they were all confused, and it's just another act of God taking care of the Israelites. And this caused the remaining tribes to reconvene with Saul and Jonathan, and God saved Israel that day, which is a recurring theme also. So God instructed Samuel to go up to Bethlehem to sacrifice at the house of Jesse. Samuel was afraid Saul would kill him because Samuel was to anoint a new king. God looks at the heart of a person, but people look at the outward appearance. So, like we were saying earlier, Saul was a tall and handsome man, and so Israelites wanted him as a king. So this brings us to Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed David, the youngest son of Jesse. I believe he was son number 8, if I remember right. The Spirit of the Lord came upon David at that time. So a giant named Goliath with the Philistines challenged the Israelites to a fight, and whoever lost would serve the other. Saul would give his daughter his great riches, and he'd give him a tax exemption to the person who killed Goliath. That's what Saul put out there. Say, if you take care of Goliath, this is what you get. David was insulted that Goliath defied the armies of the living God. So Saul sent for David when he heard the news what he was saying. Oh, David got all upset, and so Saul said, "I want to see him." David assured Saul that God would deliver him from the giant as God delivered him from the lion and the bear before. Saul clothed David with battle clothing, but it was too heavy for him. So he took all it off and went out with a slingshot, and we all know the story, hit him in the forehead with a stone from a slingshot, came up, took Goliath's massive sword, and cut his head off with it. Okay? Saul told Abner, the commander of the army, to find out whose son David was. So he did. The Israelites plundered the Philistines when they ran off because they were scared after the killing of Goliath. So this Goliath guy got killed, so Philistines just looked out. And David was summoned to Saul and told him that he was the son of Jesse. So Jonathan made a covenant with David, and Saul became angry when women sang, Saul slayed thousands where David slayed 10,000s. So there's a jealousy thing going. The Spirit of the Lord left Saul, and he tried to kill David with a spear. And so David behaved wisely, causing Israel to love him. Just because of the way he was, Israel started loving him. And Saul tried to set David up and cause the Philistines to go after David. And David loved Saul's daughter. Her name was Michal, Michal. I'm probably saying that wrong. Saul required a dowry of 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be for them to get married. And David was an overachiever. He gave him 200 instead of 100, so he doubled it. David became highly esteemed with the Israelites because he was wise in handling the war with the Philistines. And with that, I'm out of time, and I will see you next time, and God bless you.